A household does not collapse when a man disappears. It quietly learns whom it truly relied on. The scandal fades. The whispers thin. Yet something unexpected begins to rise from the silence she kept so carefully. Power shifts without warning, reshaping the home from within in ways no one dared to predict. Tonight, you will walk with her into the quiet spaces where authority is born without a sound. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If one were to step into a household just after a scandal had quieted, the air would feel strangely suspended, as though the walls themselves were waiting to see what would happen next. The gossip that once cracked through corridors and markets would have faded into a distant hum, leaving behind a residue more damaging than noise: uncertainty. A family's reputation, once shaken, did not simply settle back into place. It lingered in fragments, unsettling the servants, unsettling the neighbours, unsettling even the furniture that had witnessed every argument and whispered accusation. What remained was a structure that looked intact from afar, but felt hollow the moment one walked through its doors. The disappearance of men in such households, lost to war, illness, exile, or debts they could no longer outrun, only added to the instability. Their absence was not dramatic, it was practical. Doors no longer opened at certain hours. Footsteps once heard on the upper floor fell silent. Papers remained unsigned. Horses grew restless from a lack of command. Nothing collapsed, but nothing functioned as it used to. Life continued in awkward rhythms, while the responsibilities that men once shouldered drifted loose like unanchored threads. Those threads had to be gathered by someone, yet no one dared to claim them immediately. Not when the scandal had left the foundation soft. For the women in these homes, those who had been observed, judged, and sometimes blamed without proof. The shift came quietly, not as authority, but as a vacuum. A vacuum does not speak. It does not instruct. It simply waits for someone to fill it. The wife, still expected to maintain appearance and order, now found herself at the center of something she had not asked for. A leadership role formed not through ambition, but through necessity. Her name, once whispered in the context of suspicion, slowly began appearing in ledgers, in letters, in conversations about rent, harvests, and wages, not because she had been granted permission, but because the work demanded it. The silence in which this transition occurred was striking. There were no proclamations, no declarations of authority. Decisions emerged through action, a document signed because no one else was present, a debt negotiated because delay meant disaster, servants dismissed or promoted because loyalty was suddenly more precious than skill. Even the children sensed the shift. They approached her differently, watching her with the cautious eyes of those who recognized that something had changed, though they could not yet name it. The household had not elected a leader, it had simply recognized one. Yet outside the home, society moved more slowly. Neighbors remained suspicious of any woman who stepped too firmly into responsibilities considered masculine. Officials preferred signatures belonging to men, even deceased ones. Merchants hesitated before addressing a woman directly. The scandal had marked her, and the absence of her husband amplified that mark. She operated in the shadows of old judgments, forced to maneuver within a structure that tolerated her actions only when they appeared dutiful rather than authoritative. Her growing influence was both necessary and resented. The tension between what she now did and what she was expected to do created a strange liminal moment in the household's life. It was neither collapse nor recovery. It was the uneasy middle, where reputation hung unresolved. and authority had not yet acquired a name. Every movement she made carried weight. Every silence risked being interpreted as guilt or weakness. And yet, she moved anyway, because survival left no room for hesitation. The scandal had shaken the family, the disappearance of the man had hollowed it. But in the echo of those disruptions, the possibility of a new order began to form. The most unsettling part of this period was its quietness. No one acknowledged the shift, but everyone felt it. The servants stepped differently. The neighbors stared longer. The children watched their mother with an awareness beyond their years. Even she, at moments, hesitated before giving an instruction, as though checking whether she truly had the right. But the household listened, because no one else spoke. Silence became the medium through which authority grew. Slowly, unexpectedly, and without permission. And within that silence lay the earliest hints of a transformation that no one dared announce. The beginning of a woman becoming the center of power in a house that had once overlooked her. These early days revealed how instability could quietly rearrange an entire household. The responsibilities gathering at her feet were already shifting her role in ways she had not intended. And deeper within that silence, something far more enduring than survival was about to take shape. The shift began with tasks that no longer had an owner. When the man of the house vanished, through illness, war, disgrace, or exile, the work he once carried silently drifted toward her, settling on her desk. Her hands, her attention. At first, she approached these responsibilities with hesitation, still shaped by the posture of defense she had been forced into during the scandal. But hesitation did not postpone reality. Bills arrived. Tenants waited. Fields needed oversight. Servants sought direction. A household without leadership does not pause. It simply exposes the cracks that leadership once covered. And she found herself filling those cracks because there was no one else left to do it. What began as a reluctant effort to protect what remained of the family's dignity soon evolved into something more defined. She reviewed ledgers that had long been ignored, discovering debts her husband had hidden and obligations he had failed to meet. She walked the fields herself, noting the condition of the soil and livestock with the care of someone who understood that every misstep now had consequences measured not in reputation but in survival. The estate no longer felt like a symbol of status. It felt like a fragile mechanism that required constant attention. And she learned to operate it piece by piece. In this process, she was forced to shed the habits of a woman who once lived under scrutiny. During the scandal, she had learned to stay quiet, to minimize her presence, to speak only when necessary so as not to feed gossip. But now, silence served a different purpose. It became a method rather than a shield. She asked fewer questions because she needed fewer answers. She stated her decisions without inviting debate. She watched people more closely, reading loyalty in their behavior instead of their promises. Silence, in her hands, had hardened into a tool of leadership. Those who came to her seeking guidance were often surprised by the steadiness of her responses. She did not flinch when tenants complained. She did not soften when merchants tried to take advantage of what they presumed was inexperience. She learned quickly that the less she explained, the more they respected the boundaries she set. It was an unexpected reversal. The woman once scrutinized for every gesture now set the tone by revealing nothing beyond what the moment required. What appeared to be restraint was, in truth, a developing mastery over her environment. Her transformation unfolded quietly within the walls of the home. Yet it altered the household's rhythm in unmistakable ways. Servants began adjusting their routines to her expectations rather than to the memory of her husband's instructions. They waited for her nod before making purchases, paused before interrupting her work, and observed her new patterns with the caution of those who understood that a shift in authority was underway. They sensed she was no longer reacting to the scandal that had wounded the family, but organizing life around a future she had not yet named out loud. The children, too, registered the change. They watched her linger over maps of the estate, inspect repairs, and issue instructions with the calm precision of someone who had grown accustomed to being disappointed by others, and now preferred to ensure things were done correctly. When they approached her with questions, she answered directly, without sentimentality, as though preparing them not for comfort, but for the reality of a world where certainty could be taken from them without warning. Her decisions were rarely gentle, but they were never careless. Even her appearance began to reflect the demands of her new position. The elaborate layers she once wore to meals or gatherings, clothing chosen to deflect judgment, gave way to simpler, darker garments that allowed her to move more easily through the estate. She spent less time in the parlour and more in the office. Her husband had once claimed as his domain documents, ink, and ledgers replaced embroidery and letters of courtesy. The transformation was not dramatic, but it was unmistakable. She was no longer shielding herself from the world, but shaping the small portion of it she now controlled. What people outside the household failed to understand was that authority had not been granted to her. It had been left behind like an abandoned coat she was forced to pick up. Merchants noticed her decisions before they noticed her confidence. Relatives deferred to her out of necessity rather than respect. Officials addressed her with reluctance. Then resignation. Then a measured acknowledgement that she was now the only one capable of representing the family. She stepped into the role, slowly but filled it. Her ascent from a defensive posture into a commanding one was not marked by ambition, but by clarity. Someone had to keep the house alive. Someone had to protect the children, preserve the land, and guard what remained of the family's standing. She learned to speak little because unnecessary words weakened her authority. And she learned to decide quickly because hesitation cost more than reputation. These skills, born from hardship, created a version of her that no scandal could diminish and no absent man could replace. Her actions now shaped the household more visibly than the rumours that once surrounded her. The responsibilities gathering at her hands began forming a framework she did not openly claim but quietly commanded. And just beyond that growing authority waited the deeper question of how she would rebuild the image the scandal had shattered. The aftermath of a scandal lingered long after the noise had faded, even when neighbours stopped whispering and relatives grew tired of speculation. The residue of suspicion remained like a fine dust on every surface of the household. She understood this better than anyone. Having lived through the sharp edge of rumour, she recognized that reputation did not collapse from a single accusation. It eroded through repetition. What frightened her now was not the scandal itself, but the realization that whispers could outlive truth, shaping how others saw her long after the event had passed. This awareness forced her to examine every gesture she made, every decision she allowed to be visible, every silence she let stand, uncorrected. Rumours in their quiet way behaved like smoke. They drifted into rooms she had never entered, travelled into markets she had never visited, and shaped opinions of people she would never meet. There was no confronting something so intangible. Instead, she learned to observe its patterns. The speed at which gossip spread revealed which neighbours held power. The persistence of certain accusations showed which relationships had weakened long before the scandal, and the subjects that faded quickly exposed which alliances still protected her. Understanding these dynamics allowed her to see the social world not as a collection of opinions, but as a landscape she could navigate if she moved with precision. Rebuilding her reputation did not come through grand gestures or public speeches. Those would have only revived the old suspicions. Instead, she relied on consistency. She appeared at church at the same hour each week. Never late. Never rushed. She spoke gently to those who greeted her, offering neither excessive warmth nor coldness. Her clothing remained modest, free of embellishment that could spark criticism. She paid her debts promptly, thanked merchants without flattery, and maintained the estate with a steadiness that left little room for speculation. Over time, the community began speaking not of the scandal, but of her reliability, an identity she crafted through repetition rather than persuasion. She learned that stability was its own language. When people saw her behave the same way day after day, they adjusted their assumptions. Rumors grew less satisfying when the subject refused to behave like a guilty woman. In this way, she reshaped her image, not by denying the past, but by refusing to let it define her present. Her discipline became a quiet form of dominance, one that did not seek approval, but quietly demanded it. The more predictable her actions, the more unpredictable her critics became, unsure how to attack someone who no longer fit the shape of their accusations. Yet consistency alone could not protect her. She needed allies. Individuals whose reputations stood firmly enough that their association with her reshaped public perception. She did not choose them for affection, she chose them for stability. The widow managed her own affairs discreetly. The merchant who valued efficiency over gossip. The minister, who rarely engaged in local disputes. These relationships served as anchors, tying her image to individuals who would not allow their own names to be tarnished by proximity. She did not seek their validation. She created circumstances in which their acknowledgement of her became part of their own self-interest. Alliances formed quietly, through shared responsibilities rather than explicit agreements. The widow assisted her with organizing charity collections, giving onlookers reason to see her as a woman of responsibility. The merchant extended her favorable terms, signaling trust in her financial judgment. The minister invited her children to participate in church functions, reframing her family as part of the community rather than outside it. Each association added a layer of legitimacy, making it harder for old accusations to survive unchallenged. She also learned the cost of confrontation. To argue with rumors was to feed them. To denounce her critics was to validate their importance. She realized that power lay not in disproving accusations, but in becoming someone whose daily actions made those accusations irrelevant. Ignoring slander was not a weakness, it was a strategy. Silence, once a burden, became a boundary that protected her from battles she did not need to fight. Those who attempted to provoke her found themselves speaking into a void that reflected poorly on them rather than on her. Over time, the scandal became a faint shadow rather than a defining event. People remembered it vaguely, uncertain of the details, more interested in her current stability than in past disruptions. This transformation did not erase what had happened, it rewrote its meaning. Instead of being the woman touched by disgrace, she became the woman who had endured it and continued forward without collapsing. In a society that valued resilience almost as much as morality, this shift altered her trajectory entirely. What she carried from the scandal was not shame, but insight. She knew now how fragile reputation could be and how deliberately it needed to be shaped. The image was not an ornament, it was a form of protection, and those who failed to understand this found themselves at the mercy of a world that rewarded perception more than truth. Her careful composure revealed how a ruined reputation could be rebuilt through patience and deliberate restraint. The boundaries she formed with allies and silence began rewriting how others perceived her. What followed was a quieter shift, one that hinted at responsibilities soon to rest entirely in her hands. There was a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when the balance of the household shifted entirely toward her. It did not happen with ceremony or acknowledgement. It emerged through the accumulation of decisions others once assumed she would never be permitted to make. At first, she had stepped into these duties because necessity allowed her no alternative. But over time, the nature of her involvement changed. Her signature began appearing on documents that needed a valid authority. Her voice determined how land would be rented, how wages would be adjusted, and how debts would be resolved. What had once been the reluctant activity of a woman protecting her household grew into the deliberate management of someone shaping its future. Those who had previously doubted her, neighbors, merchants, and distant relatives, found themselves in quiet recalibration. The woman they once whispered about now held the keys to the estate's survival. Her decisions affected incomes, harvests, negotiations, and livelihoods. They still remembered the scandal, but it no longer served as a weapon. Instead, it was a story that explained her caution, her discipline, and the unyielding steadiness she brought to every transaction. The whispers that once undermined her now fed a narrative of resilience, one that even her critics unconsciously relied upon to understand how she had come to occupy such a central position. Her silence had once been interpreted as guilt. Now it was seen as composure. Her restraint, formerly mistaken for fear, looked increasingly like judgment, an ability to evaluate without being swayed by pride or temper. Those who sought her approval learned to approach with clarity and directness. Vague promises or emotional pleas found no traction. She wanted only what could hold the household together, and she pursued that goal with a practicality that left little room for sentiment. In this way, she became the axis around which others moved, whether they wished to or not. The estate began to reflect this new order. Repair work happened more quickly because she refused to delay maintenance for the sake of appearances. Books were balanced with greater accuracy because she did not excuse outdated customs or sloppy record-keeping. Tenants found their agreements renewed or revoked based on consistent criteria rather than personal favoritism. Even the servants adjusted their routines, recognizing that her expectations were stricter but also fairer. Within the walls, where she had once been treated as a secondary figure, she now shaped the rhythms of everyday life with precise and deliberate control. Outside the household, society had no choice but to reassess her role. Officials who preferred speaking with men were forced to accept her authority when documents required her authorization. Merchants who once assumed she would be easily manipulated now re-evaluated their strategies after discovering that her decisions were unwavering. Relatives who had expected to intervene found themselves blocked by a woman who no longer sought their approval or protection. They may not have liked the authority she wielded, but they could not ignore its legitimacy. Ironically, the scandal that had nearly ruined her became the foundation for her strength. It had stripped away illusions, exposed disloyal alliances, and taught her to rely on judgment rather than trust. Because she had survived public doubt, private negotiations no longer intimidated her. Because she had endured humiliation, she no longer feared the disapproval of those who had once criticized her. The experience had been painful, but it hardened her into someone capable of controlling resources without wavering, a guardian shaped by adversity rather than privilege. In quiet moments, she recognized the transformation. She understood that she was no longer preserving a legacy someone else had built. She was creating one of her own. Her influence extended beyond the household, shaping how others interpreted strength, resilience, and leadership. She had become the figure people turned to, not because they believed she wanted power, but because she had proven she could wield it responsibly. Authority had settled on her naturally, like a mantle that fit more securely with each passing season. She did not celebrate this change. She merely accepted it. Power, in her understanding, was not an ornament, but a responsibility that required vigilance. The more she controlled, the more carefully she guarded her decisions. The estate in her hands no longer resembled the one her husband had left behind. It was more organized, more disciplined, and far more dependent on her than on the man whose absence had once created the crisis. The woman who had been doubted, scrutinized, and dismissed had become the person others now sought for stability. Her rise was not dramatic but inexorable, shaped by necessity and carried forward by competence. The scandal that once threatened to define her had instead prepared her for a role few believed she could fill. And she filled it. Her ascent revealed how a damaged reputation could evolve into a source of authority once hardship forged clarity. The household had grown accustomed to relying on her judgment, even when they refused to acknowledge it openly. A deeper shift, however, was gathering beneath this stability, one that would test how far her influence could extend beyond the estate's walls. Numbers became the first territory she had to reclaim, a landscape shaped not by emotion or reputation, but by facts that refused to bend. Columns of ink revealed a different history from the one her husband had presented, one built on neglected payments, optimistic borrowing, and small indulgences that accumulated quietly into substantial strain. As she opened each ledger, she realized she was not inheriting a functioning structure, but a fragile one, held together by assumptions rather than accuracy. What she confronted was not a crisis brought on by his disappearance, but a slow erosion that had begun years earlier. Inventorying the estate demanded that she step into roles no one had ever planned for her, with a steward at her side or, at times, entirely alone. She walked the perimeter of fields her husband had once described, confidently but seldom inspected. Soil, once recorded as fertile, now lies thin and overworked. Buildings listed as sturdy showed signs of neglect, concealed beneath new paint. Livestock numbers fluctuated according to explanations that shifted depending on who was speaking. Each detail forced her to recognize that the household's stability had always depended less on competence and more on the illusion of control. Once she understood the extent of that illusion, she began reducing excess with an efficiency that startled those accustomed to her quieter past. Redundant servants lost their positions, extravagances that served no purpose beyond appearance. Fine table linens, imported goods, and decorative purchases meant to impress visitors disappeared from the household budget. Meals grew simpler, gatherings became rare. She rejected the idea that luxury protected status. Survival demanded restraint, and she enforced it without apology. Merchants who had grown comfortable with flexible deadlines and inflated prices quickly realized those days were over. She met them with questions they had never expected from her. Why had the cost of grain increased when the harvest had been stable? Why did invoices include charges not previously agreed upon? Why had deliveries arrived short without explanation? Those who attempted to comfort her with vague assurances soon discovered she accepted none of them. Precision became her shield. Documentation became her language. She refused every attempt to cloud the numbers with charm or intimidation. Her approach to debt was even more uncompromising. Instead of hiding from overdue payments, she summoned each creditor directly. Their initial surprise at meeting her gave her an advantage. They expected hesitation, emotional pleading, or ignorance. Instead, she brought detailed accounts, proposed revised schedules grounded in reality, and questioned interest rates that had been quietly increased over time. Some resisted, but many adjusted their tone when they sensed she would not yield to their expectations. She negotiated not from fear, but from clarity. And gradually, the mountain of obligations became something she could reshape rather than fear. Examining these debts revealed an uncomfortable truth. Much of the estate's decline stemmed not from hardship, but from her husband's indulgence. He had spent on horses he rarely used, extended credit to acquaintances who had no intention of returning favors, and purchased goods meant to impress rather than sustain. Realizing this did not anger her, it steeled her. She understood now how easily authority distorted judgment when wielded without restraint. The estate had paid the price for that carelessness, and she was determined it would not do so again. As her decisions accumulated, signs of recovery appeared. Balance sheets aligned more closely with reality. Repairs were prioritized based on function rather than pride. Tenants who had struggled under inconsistent policies found themselves treated with fairness, though not leniency. She insisted on timely payments, but also on clarity in agreements. Servants sensed the household entering a new phase, one defined by order rather than habit. They adjusted to her expectations not because they feared her, but because the structure she created left little room for ambiguity. Her grasp of financial matters did not go unnoticed. Merchants addressed her with increasing respect. Though sometimes grudgingly, officials became accustomed to her presence. Relatives who had once doubted her capability now found themselves seeking her judgment on matters they previously would have brought to her husband. Authority, once forced upon her, began to settle naturally into her hands. Through this transformation, she remained aware that her role had not been granted, but taken. She had stepped into the vacuum left behind, repaired what had been damaged, and reshaped a failing estate into one capable of sustaining itself. Competence, not inheritance, became the foundation of her leadership, and those who interacted with her gradually recognized that the estate's survival was tied not to the memory of its former head, but to the discipline of the woman now guiding it. Her command of the estate's finances revealed how stability emerged when clarity replaced indulgence. Each decision tightened the framework around her authority, reinforcing her presence as the estate's true center. Yet beyond the balance sheets, another challenge awaited, one that required managing not accounts, but the people whose loyalty determined the household's fate. Households in transition often revealed their deepest fractures through the behavior of those who worked within them. Servants who once carried out their duties with a predictable rhythm now watched her movements with subtle calculation, weighing past loyalties against the changing structure of authority. Some had served her husband for decades, absorbing his habits, excuse, and expectations. They hesitated before obeying her instructions, as though waiting for a familiar voice to confirm them. Others adopted a guarded demeanor, sensing the estate was shifting toward a different center of gravity. Stability depended not only on ledgers or land, but on the people who moved through the house each day. And she understood that order required more than endurance. It required control. Replacing staff was never her first intention. Yet necessity pushed the decision forward. Certain servants resisted her authority, not openly, but through small acts of defiance, delayed messages, incomplete tasks, inaccuracies disguised as forgetfulness. These gestures, though minor, threatened the fragile structure she was working to rebuild. She recognized that hesitation stemmed not from incompetence, but from loyalty to a man who was no longer present. She did not resent this attachment, but she could not permit it to dictate the household's future. Quietly, deliberately, she dismissed those whose allegiance lay with memory rather than responsibility. Their departures unsettled the remaining staff, but the effect was clarifying. Those who stayed understood the new order without needing to hear it spoken. Her system of rewards and discipline was developed with equal restraint. She did not raise her voice or offer dramatic punishments. Instead, she relied on consistency, something the household had long lacked. Servants who carried out their duties with precision found themselves entrusted with additional responsibilities, granted small privileges, or given wages on time without quibble. Those who faltered repeatedly saw their tasks reduced, their access restricted, or their contracts terminated. The transparency of her methods created an environment in which expectations were unmistakable. People did not have to guess what pleased or angered her. The structure itself communicated those answers. This clarity gradually reshaped the atmosphere of the estate. Servants, accustomed to the unpredictability of her husband's moods and indulgences, adjusted to her steadiness. Discovering that she valued competence more than sentiment, she watched their interactions with each other as carefully as she evaluated their work. Whispered alliances, quiet quarrels, and subtle shifts in hierarchy did not escape her attention. A household was not merely a collection of tasks, but a network of personalities. And she learned to read it the way she read a ledger, tracking patterns, identifying weaknesses, correcting imbalances before they spread. As the internal order strengthened, she began shaping the household into a cohesive unit rather than a scattering of individuals working in parallel. Instructions that once traveled through informal channels now followed a structure she enforced deliberately. The cook reported to the steward. The steward reported to her. Tasks were delegated with purpose rather than habit. Schedules were standardized, supplies were inventoried regularly. She replaced improvisation with routine, understanding that predictability created trust. Even those who disliked her leadership found comfort in the absence of chaos. Gradually, the estate began to function with a quiet efficiency that surprised visitors. Servants moved with intention rather than haste. Rooms were prepared on time. Messages reached their destinations without delay. Work completed without complaint became the norm rather than the exception. Those living under her roof began to recognize her not as a temporary guardian, but as the source of stability that allowed them to earn their livelihoods without fear of collapse. Their respect did not arise from affection. It grew from witnessing her ability to maintain order in a world that often failed to offer it. She understood the symbolic weight of this. A household that acted as one reflected not just her authority but her judgment. Her husband's absence no longer created uncertainty. It created space for her leadership to define the estate. The unity she cultivated served as both shield and foundation. A shield against external criticism. A foundation for the future she was constructing. For the first time since the scandal, the household did not feel vulnerable. It felt deliberate, aligned, structured around her presence. There remained moments of doubt, usually late at night when the house was silent, and the responsibilities she carried seemed too heavy for a single pair of hands. But each morning she found the staff awaiting her directives, accepting them without hesitation. Their obedience was not blind, it was earned, through discipline, fairness, and unyielding clarity. She had become the axis of the estate. The household held together not because tradition demanded it, but because she willed it into coherence. Her command over the staff revealed how internal order could restore what scandal had weakened. The household now operated with a unity shaped by her discipline and judgment. A more intricate challenge, however, awaited in the realm of family, where authority required not structure, but guidance shaped by blood and expectation. Motherhood, once a role defined by routine affection and quiet supervision, became something far more strategic when she assumed responsibility for the estate. The absence of her husband altered the household's expectations, but it transformed her children's futures even more. She could no longer raise them with the gentle assumption that their paths had been set by lineage and gender. Instead, she approached their upbringing with the same precision she applied to ledgers and negotiations, understanding that their survival, and the survival of the family's standing, depended on preparation rather than tradition. Her son, still young enough to be shaped, but old enough to sense the weight of change, became the focus of lessons that blended tenderness with ambition. She involved him in small decisions at first, reviewing market prices, observing tenant meetings, visiting the fields, and learning how to assess the health of livestock. He watched quietly, absorbing her composure, noticing how she asked questions without revealing uncertainty. She did not project onto him the confidence of a future heir. Rather, she required him to witness what stewardship demanded. His education became a discipline of observation, a practice that trained him to recognize the difference between authority that was inherited and authority that was earned. When he struggled, she did not soften the lesson. A future heir could not be shielded from hardship. She let him fail at calculations. Let him misjudge a horse's temperament. Let him misunderstand an agreement's terms before guiding him toward clarity. He learned that mistakes were not shameful unless repeated, and that leadership did not arise from birth, but from preparation. By the time he could read the estate's accounts with minimal guidance, he understood that power was not a performance, but a responsibility that demanded vigilance. Her daughter's path required different strategies, shaped by dangers far quieter, yet far more constricting. Alliances formed through marriage could secure stability or destroy it. And she recognized early how easily a young woman could be trapped by circumstances disguised as opportunity. She ensured her daughter learned to recognize the subtleties of negotiation, how to read a polite insult, How to identify when flattery concealed intention. How to maintain composure in rooms designed to test obedience. Conversations between them often took place in private, conducted in tones that balanced caution with empowerment. The girl learned that silence could be as effective as argument, and that retreat could sometimes be a form of defense. Education became the thread through which she secured the future of both children. Books replaced idle afternoons. Lessons expanded beyond etiquette to include arithmetic, estate law, and the geography of neighbouring lands. She encouraged questions, even difficult ones, because curiosity indicated strength rather than rebellion. Tutors were chosen carefully, not for prestige, but for integrity and patience. She dismissed one who attempted to instill rigid obedience, recognizing the danger of training her children to bow before every authority. Instead, she cultivated independence, reasoning that a family rebuilt through resilience must raise heirs capable of protecting themselves. Her household gradually adjusted to this new form of motherhood. Servants overheard discussions about inheritance rights, agreements, and the mechanics of trade. They watched the children follow her through the estate, with notebooks in hand rather than toys. Some whispered that she was too strict, but those whispers did not influence her. She understood that a weakened reputation left little margin for error. Her children had to command respect before receiving it, and she would not allow them to stumble into adulthood unprepared. As seasons changed, the effects of her guidance became increasingly visible. Her son carried himself with a steadiness uncommon in boys his age, speaking with a measured tone that reflected her influence. Her daughter learned to navigate social gatherings with a quiet intelligence that unsettled those who underestimated her. Neither child displayed arrogance. Both exhibited awareness. They saw their mother not only as a caretaker, but as a model of how adversity could be transformed into competence. These lessons extended beyond education. They absorbed her resilience, the way she remained composed during conflicts, the way she approached setbacks without collapse, the way she protected the household without theatrics. They understood implicitly that strength did not require spectacle, and that survival often depended on decisions made in silence. Through her, they inherited not only land or name, but the discipline necessary to preserve both. Her role as a mother no longer fit the gentle boundaries society assigned. She had become a strategist, shaping future leaders. A guardian, ensuring her children would not face vulnerability unarmed. This redefinition did not diminish her affection. It deepened it, grounding love in preparation rather than sentiment. Her children would enter adulthood carrying the foundation she built, not through comfort, but through clarity. Her transformation of motherhood revealed how survival demanded foresight as much as care. The children under her guidance grew into reflections of her discipline and resilience. Yet even as she shaped their futures, external forces beyond blood and household began pressing against the fragile order she had created. Recognition arrived gradually, not through praise or celebration, but through the way people began speaking her name without attaching it to her husband's. At first, the change appeared in small places. A merchant's letter addressed to her directly rather than the household. A steward referring to her decisions as final rather than provisional. A neighbour asking her opinion about a boundary dispute rather than waiting for a man to intervene. These moments accumulated quietly, forming a pattern she noticed only when she realised that she had not heard herself described as someone's wife in weeks. What had once been her entire public identity now felt like a distant layer, one that no longer defined her place in the world. Authority revealed itself most clearly in the way her choices began shaping lives beyond the estate. A single decision about land rental determined whether a tenant family could survive the winter. A refusal to renew an old contract pushed a disloyal steward to seek employment elsewhere. A change in planting schedules influenced the labour of dozens of workers. What she decided, others lived with. She understood the gravity of this influence, and she exercised it with a restraint born not from insecurity, but from the memory of having once been powerless. Every instruction she gave carried an awareness of consequence. Yet she moved forward steadily, guided by the clarity she had developed through hardship. People outside the estate adjusted to her presence with a mixture of caution and respect. Letters sought her approval rather than someone else's. Invitations were addressed to her, acknowledging that social gatherings required her participation if alliances were to remain stable. Even distant relatives who once dismissed her began writing with polite inquiries about her health and the estate's condition. An implicit acknowledgement that she now held the authority to either strengthen or weaken family ties. Her role had expanded beyond the house she managed. It had become part of a broader network of expectations and negotiations. The most striking transformation came in how her silence was interpreted. Once, people saw quietness as a sign of guilt or fragility. Now they understood it differently. Silence became a boundary, a signal that she controlled what information left the household. It became a strategy that unsettled those who tried to manipulate her, revealing their intentions more clearly than words could. When she listened without rushing to fill the space, others revealed more than they intended. Her silence did not submit. It judged. It carried weight because it implied thought, and thought implied authority. Within the estate, her presence shaped daily behavior. Servants paused when she entered a room, not out of fear, but because they recognized that her standards governed the space. The rhythm of the household followed the structure she had created. Predictable, efficient, free from the chaos that had once undermined stability. She did not demand admiration. She demanded competence. People responded by giving her exactly that, understanding that her leadership offered them a cleaner, safer environment than they had known under her husband's inconsistent rule. Her children, too, reflected the shift. They spoke of her not as the woman who managed the household while their father was gone, but as the person who ensured their future. They sought her judgment with the expectation that it would be firm and fair. They saw her not as a temporary guardian, but as the center around which the estate's security revolved. Motherhood remained at the heart of her identity, but now it coexisted with something larger, a role that anchored the family's survival and shaped its direction. There was no single moment when she became the head of the house. Instead, the transformation existed in every unspoken acknowledgement, every hesitant bow, every decision that reached her desk because no one else could make it. People no longer questioned whether she should lead. They adjusted themselves to the reality that she already did. Her identity expanded into a role society had never intended for her, yet one she filled with a steadiness that made opposition seem both impractical and unnecessary. She did not claim this position openly. She simply continued the work she had begun the day the scandal forced her to defend herself, and the day her husband's absence required her to act. Leadership had emerged not from ambition, but from endurance. And in a world that valued appearances above truth, her rise demonstrated how competence could reshape the boundaries of expectation without making a sound. Her growing presence reshaped how others spoke, acted, and aligned themselves around the household. The unspoken recognition of her authority signaled a deeper shift in the estate's balance. Something more intricate awaited her next, one that required navigating ties of blood, obligation, and loyalty with careful precision. Family relationships, once managed through routine visits and familiar courtesies, took on a sharper edge after she assumed control of the estate. Relatives who had once treated her with polite distance began watching the household more closely, drawn by curiosity, et concern, or convenience. Some arrived with genuine intentions, offering support in the form of advice or provisions. Others came because they sensed opportunity in the absence of a male head, a chance to influence decisions, reclaim old grievances, or position themselves for future gain. She recognized these motives immediately, for scandal had taught her to hear what people wanted, even when they spoke of something else. Old conflicts resurfaced in unexpected ways. A cousin who had once argued with her husband over a boundary fence now attempted to rekindle the dispute with her, hoping she would yield for the sake of maintaining harmony. A sister-in-law who had kept her distance during the scandal returned with soft inquiries about the estate's finances, phrased as concern, but carrying the unmistakable tone of evaluation. She approached each encounter with restrained composure, refusing to let emotion revive conflicts that had long since exhausted their purpose. She learned to dissolve tension not through apology, but through clarity, ending arguments before they had room to grow. Diplomacy became essential. Rather than avoiding difficult relatives, she met them directly, stripping conversations of ambiguity. She acknowledged past disagreements calmly, not to reopen them, but to remove their usefulness as weapons. This disarmed those who expected defensiveness and unsettled those who hoped to exploit unresolved grievances. Her neutrality was deliberate. She offered neither warmth nor hostility, only a steady presence that left little room for manipulation. Mending fractured relationships did not require affection. It required removing the leverage others believed they held. At the same time, she began mapping the extended family as carefully as she had mapped the estate's finances. Certain relatives possessed influence in local markets. Others held land adjacent to hers, or connections within the church, or long-standing goodwill among tenants. She did not seek alliances out of sentiment, but out of strategy. A well-placed cousin could stabilize trade routes during shortages. A brother-in-law respected in legal matters could confirm boundary claims if disputes arose. Even distant relations could provide protection simply by acknowledging her authority publicly. She wove these ties slowly, building a network strong enough to counter external threats without relying on any single individual. Her ability to distribute trust selectively became a form of control. Those who proved reliable found themselves included in decisions that affected shared borders or mutual interests. Those who visited only when convenient were kept at a polite distance, offered hospitality but denied influence. She learned the value of withholding information, sharing only what benefited the estate and never what exposed vulnerability. Family gatherings, once predictable rituals, became opportunities for careful observation. Moments when she measured the shifting landscapes of loyalty, ambition, and resentment. Rumors about the estate's stability circulated regularly, carried by relatives who hoped to test her stance or sway public perception. Some whispered that she could not maintain the land without a man's guidance. Others speculated that her late husband's debts had grown too large for her to manage. She understood these whispers not as personal attacks, but as attempts to weaken her claim. In response, she did not defend herself directly. Instead, she ensured that the estate appeared orderly, prosperous, and under control. Well-maintained fields, timely payments, and the visible efficiency of her household staff spoke more convincingly than any argument she could offer. More troubling were the quiet attempts by certain relatives to position themselves as protectors of her children. Under the guise of concern, they suggested rearranging guardianship, proposing that a male relative should oversee the estate until her son reached adulthood. These offers were framed as benevolent, yet she recognized their underlying motive. Once guardianship shifted, control of the estate might follow. She countered these proposals with calm refusal, presenting evidence of her competence without displaying even a trace of outrage. Their disappointment revealed their intentions more clearly than their words ever could. When more aggressive attempts emerged, subtle inquiries about unresolved debts, proposals to merge land, hints that certain assets should be transferred for safekeeping. She met them with unshakable precision. Documents were reviewed meticulously. Boundary lines were confirmed with legal witnesses. Every transaction followed official channels. She knew that transparency was her strongest protection. Nothing suspicious could be attributed to her if every action left a clean paper trail. Relatives seeking advantage soon realized the estate had become impermeable to schemes that once might have succeeded under her husband's trust or distraction. Gradually, her position solidified. She was no longer treated as a temporary custodian or a vulnerable widow. Relatives learned that negotiations with her required respect, accuracy, and clarity. Deference grew not because she demanded it, but because she proved consistently formidable. Family gatherings shifted around her presence. Conversations paused when she entered the room, and decisions that once excluded her now required her approval to proceed. Authority within bloodlines was rarely granted. It was contested, shaped, and earned. In navigating the shifting loyalties of both sides of the family, she demonstrated a capability that neither scandal nor widowhood could diminish. The estate remained hers, not because society permitted it, but because she refused every attempt to take it. Her careful navigation of family ties revealed how diplomacy, clarity, and vigilance could convert vulnerability into stability. The alliances she forged and the conflicts she neutralized strengthened the estate's defenses. Yet beyond kinship, another arena awaited, one where law, rather than blood, determined who held power. Legal authority, unlike household authority, did not respond to emotion, reputation, or effort. It responded to documentation, precedent, and persistence. Once her husband disappeared, she discovered that the stability she had built inside the estate meant little unless the law recognized her position. Every decision she made, every contract signed, every debt renegotiated, every boundary defended, rested on whether she could prove her right to act. The realization was unsettling, but it forced her into a world she had never been encouraged to enter, one governed by written rules rather than unspoken expectations. Understanding inheritance law became her first task. She spent long evenings reviewing documents that outlined what her husband had owned outright, what he had shared, and what had been entangled in debts or obligations she had previously known nothing about. Marriage had positioned her within the family structure, but it had not guaranteed security. The distinction between dower rights, joint property, and inherited land revealed how vulnerable she could be if a distant relative chose to contest her authority. She learned quickly that entitlement was not the same as possession, and possession meant little without a legitimate claim. Her dowry, once treated as a symbolic gesture of union, to emerged as a critical foundation of her legal standing. It protected certain assets from seizure and granted her leverage in disputes involving marital property. She examined the terms carefully, identifying conditions she could invoke if anyone attempted to challenge her guardianship of the estate. What had once been a ceremonial document now became a shield, one she had not realized she possessed, and one she would wield with calculated precision. The next step required expertise she did not yet have. She hired a lawyer whose reputation for discretion outweighed his ambition. He did not flatter her or express false confidence. He presented facts plainly, allowing her to navigate them with increasing mastery. Together, they reviewed boundaries, contracts, wills, and past agreements her husband had neglected to update. The more she studied these documents, the clearer it became that the estate's legal vulnerabilities predated the scandal. Her husband had relied on social goodwill rather than legal certainty, leaving gaps that others could exploit. Under her direction, those gaps began to close. She filed updated claims on contested borders, ensuring that neighboring families could not redraw lines to their advantage. She formalized agreements with tenants, replacing informal arrangements with written contracts that protected both the estate and the people who lived on it. She clarified guardianship of her children in legal terms, making it far more difficult for relatives to challenge her authority. Each action fortified the estate's stability, sealing points of entry for potential threats. Her lawyer helped her craft a legal identity that matched the authority she exercised within the household. She learned to ask direct questions during consultations, to request copies of every document, and to insist on thorough explanations. Her precision unsettled those who expected her to rely blindly on legal guidance. Instead, she approached the law the same way she approached finances, as something that demanded understanding before action. She did not delegate control, she shared it, ensuring that every strategy served the estate rather than the interests of those who offered their counsel. As her legal competence grew, so did her confidence. She recognized that the law was not merely a set of restrictions, but a tool that could protect her from interference. When a distant cousin hinted at disputing her management, she responded not with anger, but with documentation. Records proving her guardianship, her financial stabilizations, and her rightful claim to decision-making authority. The cousin withdrew the challenge quickly, realizing that legal confrontation would expose his motives and likely fail. Others observed this outcome closely, adjusting their assumptions about what she could and could not defend. She used the law not as a weapon, but as a boundary. Anyone attempting to undermine her authority encountered a process they could not circumvent: signatures, witnesses, records, and formal procedures that protected her decisions. Those who had once relied on social leverage discovered they had none in the realm of official documents. The quiet discipline she had used to manage rumors and finances now extended into the legal sphere, transforming her into a figure both resilient and untouchable. By asserting her rights through established structures, she reshaped how society perceived her. She was no longer merely a widow maintaining a household. She was an agent with legal standing, capable of defending her estate against opportunism. Her authority no longer depended on respect or reputation alone. It was inscribed in documents that could withstand scrutiny long after her presence in a room. Her mastery of legal protections revealed how authority rooted in law could secure what discipline alone could not. Each document strengthened her position, transforming vulnerability into legitimacy. Another test, however, awaited her in the realm of reputation, one where perception often moved faster and struck harder than any legal claim. Silence, once a passive refuge, became a calculated instrument once the scandal faded. She understood that past events did not truly disappear. They lingered in the corners of conversation, waiting for the wrong moment to reappear. If she wanted stability for the estate, she needed to manage not only finances and legal structures, but also the narrative that surrounded her household. What others believed, what they repeated, what they avoided saying, could determine whether her authority held firm or slowly eroded under the weight of lingering suspicion. She began by limiting references to the past. Conversations that drifted toward old conflicts or whispered accusations were redirected with quiet firmness. She did not raise her voice or reprimand anyone directly. She simply refused to encourage such stories required to survive. Her disinterest drained those memories of their vitality. Without reaction, scandals lost their shape, becoming distant incidents rather than pressing concerns. People adjusted quickly to the new tone, one where dwelling on history felt both irrelevant and somewhat improper. Crafting a new story of the household required more planning. She understood that silence alone could not replace reputation. It could only erase traces. To build something stronger, she needed to offer a version of the estate that others would find easier to repeat than the remnants of scandal. She emphasized stability in every public interaction, predictable routines, courteous hospitality, orderly fields, and timely payments. Visitors left with impressions of composure and consistency. Details small enough to overlook individually but powerful when woven together. Whenever the household appeared in conversation, it was no longer as the site of past disgrace, but as a place returning to quiet discipline. Tenants spoke of fair treatment. Merchants commented on her reliability. Relatives, even those once eager for gossip, found themselves describing her firmness rather than her vulnerability. This shift did not happen through persuasion. It grew from the way she conducted daily life. Repetition, not argument, reshaped her reputation. Information became a resource she guarded carefully. She disclosed little about internal decisions, sharing updates only when necessary and always with precise language. By revealing nothing unnecessary, she created an atmosphere where speculation had little room to flourish. People could not distort what they did not know. Her quiet control unsettled those who preferred the estate in disarray, but it reassured everyone who depended on its stability. Within the household, loyalty took on a new meaning. Servants who maintained discretion found themselves trusted with additional responsibilities, managing guest arrangements, overseeing storerooms, or assisting with correspondence. Their reliability became visible through the tasks they were permitted to handle. Conversely, those who allowed whispers to linger, even inadvertently, received fewer privileges. She did not need to confront them directly. The redistribution of duties sent an unmistakable message. In this system, silence was rewarded not with praise, but with opportunity. Her decisions shaped the staff's behavior more effectively than strict rules could. They soon learned which topics were safe, which questions should remain unasked, and which memories were to be folded away permanently. A quiet discipline settled over the estate, not forced but understood. In this environment, trivial rumors died quickly, denied the oxygen of repetition. Larger stories, those that once threatened to revive the scandal, never found a foothold. Occasionally, someone outside the estate attempted to resurrect old suspicions, perhaps hoping to unsettle her or test the strength of her position. She responded with measured calm, offering no explanation, no apology, and no visible discomfort. Her neutrality under pressure signaled that the past no longer had the power to define her. Those who sought to provoke a reaction received nothing but an unshakable stillness. Their disappointment spread faster than their accusations, discouraging similar attempts. As months passed, the absence of scandal became a story in itself. People noted the estate's newfound steadiness with an air of mild surprise, as if waiting for some hidden instability to surface. When none did, the old narrative fractured, replaced by one she had quietly encouraged all along. She did not need praise or recognition, she needed control, and she had achieved it without raising her voice or rewriting the truth. Only by deciding which parts of it would be allowed to remain visible. Information, she realized, was not merely something to protect, but something to direct. A household defined by restraint invited fewer intrusions. A widow who revealed little invited fewer assumptions. A reputation rebuilt through consistency held more weight than one defended through argument. Her careful control of silence reshaped how the household spoke, turning scattered memories into something orderly and less dangerous. The story others repeated slowly drifted away from scandal and toward the stability she crafted with her own hands. Yet beneath this calm surface, a deeper shift began forming in the collective memory, waiting to reveal its influence. Memory within a household rarely shifts all at once. It changes slowly, like the settling of dust after a long disturbance. What had once been spoken in hushed tones now dissolved into something quieter, less defined, almost harmless. People who once repeated fragments of scandal began to recall events differently, not out of loyalty, but because repetition favors stability over turmoil. The story adjusted itself to fit the present, and she allowed this transformation to unfold without directing it openly. Her restraint shaped the silence around her, giving others room to forget what had once fascinated them. Children in the household absorbed this new atmosphere with particular ease. They did not grow up hearing accusations or whispered doubts. They heard instead of routines restored, fields tended, decisions made at the right moment. When they looked back on these years, they saw a woman who moved steadily through uncertainty without faltering. Her presence became the defining fact of their memory. Replacing what outsiders once gossiped about, they remembered a mother who rose early, monitored accounts, walked the estate grounds with unspoken vigilance, and returned each evening with the same calm pace. Their recollection held no place for scandal, It held only her consistency. Even the older generation, those with longer memories and sharper tongues, found their perspectives shifting. They still remembered the early turmoil. But the sharpness of those details faded under the weight of her later achievements. Stability has a way of overwriting chaos, especially when chaos no longer serves anyone's purpose. When relatives visited, they spoke less of past disruptions and more of current order. How the estate remained intact, how the children were well taught, how she oversaw matters with an authority that left little room for argument. Over time, this conversation became habitual, and habit became truth. The household staff adapted as well. Servants who once carried fragments of rumour between rooms now exchanged stories of her discipline and moderation. They whispered of how she had kept the estate afloat through difficult seasons, of how she rewarded those who avoided stirring unrest, of how she let silence settle disputes before they grew into something unmanageable. Their recollections drifted toward admiration, not because they wished to flatter her, but because daily life under her leadership proved more stable than anything that came before. They remembered what made their lives predictable, and they repeated it. Outside the estate, memory shifted more slowly, but it shifted nonetheless. Merchants who once arrived with caution now spoke of her reliability rather than her misfortune. Clergymen noted her steady contributions to parish needs. Neighbours, though not entirely free of suspicion, eventually found it easier to accept the order she maintained than to linger on events that had lost relevance. Reputation, once precarious, grew firm through repetition of the simple truth. She kept the estate functioning and caused no trouble. That alone was enough to revise public perception. She never encouraged these changes directly. Her power came from restraint, from allowing silence to do the work that argument could never accomplish. She understood that people preferred stories with clear endings, and so she gave them one by continuing her routine without interruption. The absence of new scandals allowed old narratives to collapse under their own weight. By refusing to defend herself loudly, she denied others the opportunity to challenge her position. Memory reshaped itself in the void, her quiet persistence created. Over time, the scandal transformed from a defining event into a distant shadow. It became something that older relatives mentioned only when pressed, and even then, with softened language, as though its meaning had eroded. Younger generations did not see it as part of their identity at all. They inherited a tale of endurance rather than disgrace, of leadership rather than loss. The estate's story, once fractured, knit itself back together in a form that favoured her role at its centre. This rewriting of memory happened without fanfare. There was no moment when the past was officially set aside. It simply dissolved into a narrative more convenient for everyone involved. The household needed stability, and she provided it. Relatives needed reassurance, and she embodied it. Children needed an example, and she lived it. No one announced this shift. Yet, it became undeniable. The family remembered her not as a figure of scandal, but as the unwavering force that guided them forward. She recognized the weight of this transformation quietly. Memory, once a threat, had become something she could live with, something that even worked in her favor. The same society that had once doubted her now relied on the version of history that placed her at its center. Steady and unchallenged, authority rooted in recollection proved stronger than authority rooted in law or property. What people believed had become the foundation of what they accepted. Her steady influence reshaped what the family chose to remember, replacing turmoil with an image crafted through quiet persistence. The stability she created rewrote the past into something manageable, nearly admirable. Beyond this reformed memory, she still faced the wider world, where alliances, appearances, and calculated distance dictated survival. Social life, once an extension of her husband's presence, became a terrain she had to navigate with deliberate intention. The gatherings she attended, the individuals she acknowledged, and even the silences she allowed all contributed to the identity she was now shaping. After the scandal, she stepped into public spaces cautiously, not to defend herself, but to observe how people responded when she no longer appeared in the shadow of a man. Her re-entry was measured, neither eager nor apologetic, and this restraint altered how others approached her. Selecting the right events to attend became her first strategy. She avoided gatherings known for indulgent gossip or sharp scrutiny, the kinds of gatherings where old accusations might resurface with renewed energy. Instead, she chose settings marked by practicality and moderation: church festivals, seasonal markets, modest dinners with families whose reputations lean toward discipline rather than spectacle. In these places, conversation focused on harvests, weather, or local affairs, topics that left little room for speculative storytelling. Her presence at such events signaled steadiness, implying that she did not need to defend herself because there was nothing uncertain left to discuss. She also understood the quiet power of absence. Declining invitations, offered by those who once fostered rumors or delighted in scandal, sent a message more pointed than confrontation. Without a word, she redrew social lines. People noted her absence, weighed its meaning, and adjusted their interpretation of her position. By attending only what aligned with her reconstructed identity, she gradually steered public perception toward calm respect. When she did appear, she did so with a calculated demeanor. She spoke with composure, avoiding emotional tones that could be misinterpreted as defensiveness or ambition. Her gestures remained small and precise, never hurried or restless. She listened more than she spoke, allowing others to fill conversations with their own assumptions about her. Over time, this consistent poise created an image that discouraged idle speculation. People found it difficult to associate her with past turbulence when her presence communicated such controlled restraint. Small interactions reinforced this perception. She greeted acquaintances with polite warmth, but seldom elaborated beyond what was necessary. She answered inquiries about the estate with steady clarity, offering neither flourish nor secrecy, only the facts required to maintain transparency. She rarely discussed personal matters, and when pressed, her silence carried a firmness that prevented further questioning. The boundaries she established were so consistent that they became part of how society described her: a woman of discipline, a figure who did not rely on approval, yet commanded it naturally. Maintaining distance from harmful individuals required equal subtlety. She did not openly avoid them. She simply offered fewer opportunities for engagement. When approached by someone known for stirring conflict, she responded with courteous brevity, ending the exchange before it gained momentum. When families with past grievances extended gestures of reconciliation, she accepted the sentiment without inviting deeper involvement. Her restraint ensured that no one could claim closeness she did not grant. In this way, she protected herself from potential complications without appearing defensive or vindictive. Her relationships evolved as a result. Those who valued stability grew more willing to associate with her. Sensing the reliability she embodied, they saw that her household no longer generated whispers and that her decisions reflected a consistent moral direction. These new connections formed gradually, built on mutual respect rather than necessity. She avoided forming alliances out of desperation, choosing instead to cultivate relationships that supported her long-term control of the estate. Even acquaintances who once doubted her found themselves adjusting their opinions. Her behavior left no room for old narratives to reattach themselves. Without giving them anything to criticize, she denied them the foothold required to revive animosity. Over time, the memory of past scandals faded beneath the weight of her consistent public discipline. Reputation, she realized, was not rebuilt through announcements, but through repetition. Of presence, of conduct, of silence. Each measured step in social spaces reinforced the version of herself she wished others to see. She did not need to erase the past, She only needed to make it irrelevant. The social landscape around her shifted accordingly. Invitations became more respectful. Conversations turned more cautious. People who once ignored her now sought her opinion in matters of estate management or family negotiation. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. She had become someone whose presence carried weight, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied a steadiness rarely seen in households shaken by scandal. Her composed participation in public life reshaped the social fabric around her, replacing suspicion with quiet respect. Each appearance strengthened the narrative she had crafted through restraint and intention. Yet, while the outer world began to settle, the internal demands of the estate pressed forward, urging her toward decisions that required authority beyond demeanor. Land, unlike reputation, did not respond to silence. It required presence, attention, and a steady rhythm of decisions that could not be deferred. Once the household regained its footing, she turned outward toward the fields, the tenants, and the systems of production that kept the estate alive. These responsibilities had once belonged entirely to her husband, whose methods relied on habit more than evaluation. Now, with no one else to manage them, she stepped into a role that demanded clarity rather than sentiment. Walking the land became part of her routine. Each morning, she moved along the edges of the fields, observing how tenants prepared their harvests, how equipment was maintained, how livestock was tended. She learned to read the soil, to recognize early signs of drought stress, to distinguish between honest hardship and avoidable neglect. Tenants noticed her presence, and their responses varied. Some straightened when she approached. Others watched cautiously, unsure of how much authority she intended to exercise. She offered no immediate explanations. Her steady pace and quiet inspection spoke for her. Supervision of contracts came next. She reviewed every agreement her husband had made, noting which tenants fulfilled obligations reliably and which had relied on personal leniency rather than formal terms. Those who met expectations found their contracts renewed without complication. Those who had taken advantage of the estate's previous instability were asked to renegotiate under clearer, stricter conditions. Her approach remained measured. No threats, no raised voice. But the firmness of her expectations signaled an unmistakable shift. Productivity mattered now, not personal history. The harvest season revealed how necessary these changes were. Fields that had once been allowed to operate with minimal oversight now produced uneven yields. She recognized that the estate had survived more through inertia than management. To correct this, she sought guidance from stewards, experienced in crop rotation, soil improvement, and livestock diversification. These advisors did not flatter her. They presented methods, statistics, and realistic outcomes. She listened carefully, asking questions until she understood the implications of each decision. Investing in the land required both caution and courage. She approved repairs to irrigation channels, knowing the expense would pay for itself in future seasons. She replaced aging plows with sturdier models and allowed certain fields to rest to restore their fertility. She encouraged tenants to adopt new practices, not through force, but by demonstrating the benefits through trial plots. As yields improved, even skeptical workers acknowledged the effectiveness of her strategies. Productivity, once inconsistent, began to stabilize. With stability came opportunity. She identified unused sections of land that could support new forms of production, orchards, small-scale milling, or livestock breeding. These ventures provided income independent of traditional crop yields. Diversification became her method of reducing vulnerability, ensuring that a failed harvest or sudden shortage would not endanger the estate's finances. She managed expenses carefully, reinvesting early profits rather than spending them. The slow accumulation of resources strengthened the estate in ways her husband had never considered. Her presence in the fields altered social dynamics as well. Tenants understood that she would not interfere without reason. But she expected accuracy, honesty, and consistency. They learned to approach her with detailed reports rather than excuses. Over time, this structure removed uncertainty from their interactions. They worked more efficiently because they understood the expectations clearly and trusted that she evaluated them fairly. Merchants noticed these changes. 2. Grain deliveries were now timely. Livestock sales were negotiated with precision. The estate gained a reputation for reliability, making traders more willing to offer favorable terms. Her careful management produced results that circulated beyond the household, reinforcing her authority without requiring public statements. Her approach remained consistent: modest appearance, calm observation, and precise decision-making. She rarely displayed pride in her accomplishments, but she recognized their significance. Each improvement, every repaired fence, every reorganized contract, every successful harvest, represented a step towards securing the estate's independence. The land no longer reflected her husband's legacy. It reflected her discipline. She understood that managing land was not simply about growth. It was about stability, resilience, and the ability to withstand unexpected pressures. Her decisions formed the foundation upon which future generations would depend. By strengthening production and diversifying income, she ensured the estate would not collapse under external threats or internal failures. In restoring the land, she restored something of herself as well. Responsibility grounded her, giving shape to the authority she had been forced to claim. The fields became evidence of her capability, their steadiness mirroring her own. Her careful restructuring of the land created a system that could survive uncertainty and resist exploitation. The estate grew stronger under her direction, its foundations reinforced by quiet discipline and deliberate choice. Yet beyond the fields, another form of influence awaited, one shaped not by soil or contracts, but by public virtue and charitable intent. Public virtue, unlike land or household discipline, required no formal declaration. It took shape through small, deliberate acts that others could observe and repeat in their own words. As her authority grew steadier, she recognized that practical control of the estate was not enough. What people believed about her beyond the estate boundaries mattered just as much as yields or contracts. Reputation hardened into something durable when supported by visible gestures of morality, and she approached this realm with the same restraint that shaped every part of her life after the scandal. She began with measured contributions to the parish. They were not extravagant donations meant to draw attention, nor symbolic offerings given only to fulfill expectations. Instead, her gifts were practical: timber for repairs, fabric for vestments, grain for the winter storehouse. These contributions provided stability without spectacle. Clergymen noted her reliability, and their reports, quiet, factual, unembellished, spread naturally through the community. Nothing in her behavior suggested an attempt to cleanse her image. She simply offered support where it was needed, and that sincerity gave her actions weight. Helping the poor required equal discernment. She did not dispense alms indiscriminately, nor did she allow her generosity to become a spectacle for gossip. She observed who among the villagers suffered from illness, who struggled after a failed harvest, and who had lost a spouse or parent. Her assistance arrived in the form of firewood during cold months, seed grain at planting time, or temporary work on the estate for those capable of earning wages. These gestures carried no accompanying speeches, no visible markers of charity. They were extensions of her, understanding that stability for the estate depended on stability for those who lived near it. People noticed. They spoke of her not as a figure seeking sympathy, but as someone who possessed quiet compassion. Her charity was not interpreted as an attempt to erase past scandal, but as evidence of her practical leadership. This distinction mattered. Those who flaunted generosity often invited suspicion, while those who acted discreetly earned trust. Her restraint strengthened the impact of every gesture, creating an impression more powerful than grand philanthropy could achieve. Her support extended to households whose loyalty had proven steady during turbulent years. She ensured their children had access to apprenticeships, arranged for widows to receive materials for winter clothing, and offered small loans to families starting new trades. These acts reinforced an unspoken social contract. Those who upheld the estate's dignity during its most vulnerable moments would not be forgotten. Loyalty rewarded itself, and this sense of fairness encouraged more measured behavior within the community. Even her interactions with local leaders were shaped by quiet generosity. She provided resources for road repairs that benefited multiple villages, not just her own tenants. This subtle expansion of influence strengthened her position without invoking rivalry. She did not seek credit, yet her involvement became known through outcomes rather than announcements. Roads improved. Harvest transport became easier. Market stalls saw more goods arrive on time. People traced these changes back to her, and in doing so, they wove a narrative of stable leadership. Transforming kindness into social capital required patience. She never asked for favors in return, never reminded anyone of the support she provided. Instead, she allowed memory to work slowly, binding others to her through gratitude rather than obligation. This approach differed sharply from overt alliances built on negotiation or influence. Her moral presence made her a figure whose approval mattered, whose judgment carried weight even when unspoken. Communities respond to leaders whose character they trust more than to those who command authority by force. As her image solidified, criticism became harder to express. Those who attempted to resurrect old suspicions found themselves silenced not by argument, but by collective dismissal. People preferred the version of her they had grown comfortable with. The steady widow, the disciplined landholder, the quiet benefactor. They no longer had interest in stories that contradicted the order she helped create. Society often reshapes its narratives to align with its needs. And in this case, it needed a figure of reliability more than a cautionary tale. Her work in building public virtue did not alter her demeanor. She remained reserved, rarely speaking at gatherings, rarely offering emotional explanations for her actions. But the community interpreted her restraint as dignity rather than secrecy. Her presence acquired a symbolic weight, a reminder that authority could be both quiet and benevolent. Through these gestures, she strengthened a reputation that extended beyond the estate and into the broader region. She became someone whose involvement steadied uncertain situations, whose support suggested a path toward resolution. The moral capital she accumulated formed another layer of protection, one built not from law or land, but from trust, memory, and quiet expectation. Her careful cultivation of public virtue refined the image others held of her, turning restraint and generosity into sources of influence. Each discreet gesture strengthened the foundation she had built, preparing her for challenges that demanded both moral authority and strategic control. Another shift approached, one where her evolving role would be reflected not just through charity, but through the expectations society attached to her. Public memory, once sharp with accusation, softened as the years passed. What had begun as suspicion gradually transformed into something entirely different. Admiration shaped by repetition, convenience, and the human need to revise discomfort into meaning. People did not erase the scandal from their recollections. They simply reinterpreted it, placing her at the center of a narrative that felt more useful than the truth ever had. Her steadiness allowed them to do this. She gave no speeches, offered no explanations, and attempted no dramatic gestures of redemption. Instead, she lived her days with a disciplined quiet that allowed others to imagine their own version of her story. Over time, the community began to speak of her differently. They described how she had endured hardship with composure, how she had restored the estate without assistance, and how she had guided her children through uncertainty with a steady hand. These observations, though rooted in fact, grew polished through retelling. Flaws were smoothed away, replaced by traits more easily admired. What had once been interpreted as secrecy now appeared as dignity. What had once seemed like distance became a sign of restraint. The shift was subtle, but it carried undeniable momentum. People needed examples of resilience, and she fit the role neatly. It did not matter that her silence had been a strategy rather than a virtue. They preferred to believe it expressed a depth of character forged through adversity. Her consistency gave credibility to this belief. Whenever she appeared at church, contributed to repairs, or spoke with measured patience at public gatherings, observers added new details to the evolving portrait. She did nothing to encourage this elevation, yet it grew around her like a structure built by many hands. Her transformation into a model of virtue did not rely on a dramatic change. It emerged from the contrast between who she had been rumoured to be and who she had quietly become. Society finds reassurance in such contrasts. They turned her into an emblem of the belief that order can follow chaos, that discipline can emerge from upheaval, that a household can regain stability under the guidance of someone who once seemed vulnerable. In doing so, people gave meaning to their own uncertainties, projecting their hopes onto her. As her reputation rose, expectations changed. Families experiencing misfortune looked to her example. Widows navigating their first season alone sought her counsel. Even when she offered little beyond calm presence, mothers pointed her out to their daughters at church, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who had preserved dignity through turmoil. Her story became a lesson told in quiet conversations about perseverance, leadership, and the strength hidden in those who speak little. She recognized this shift not through praise, but through the way people approached her. Their tones softened. Their questions became more earnest, and their respect carried fewer conditions. They no longer treated her as someone who had survived a scandal, but as someone who had overcome it. Her image, reshaped by community need, now served purposes beyond her control. It provided reassurance for those who feared instability and comfort for those seeking proof that disgrace did not have to define a life. The evolution of her public identity did not change her internal discipline. She continued to move through her routines with the same measured steps, the same careful decisions, the same avoidance of unnecessary attention. Yet she understood the consequences of her new position. People watched her more closely, not with suspicion but with the quiet longing of those searching for examples. This watchfulness required a different kind of restraint, one rooted in awareness that her actions now held symbolic weight. Her role as a moral figure emerged not from virtue itself, but from the narrative others constructed around her. They needed a redemption arc, and she provided one simply by refusing to disrupt the story they told. Scandal faded, replaced by an image, burnished through years of steady conduct. She did not correct them. She did not claim the title. She allowed the transformation to occur because it served the estate, the family, and the hard-earned stability she had spent years constructing. In the end, she became what society required, a figure reshaped by memory into something honourable, disciplined, and quietly admirable. Her past no longer defined her. It framed her. What once threatened to destroy her had become the foundation of a story retold in softer tones. A story that cast her as the embodiment of endurance. Her rise from suspicion to admiration revealed how memory bends toward usefulness, turning survival into virtue in the eyes of others. The image they created strengthened her influence, offering protection her silence could not provide alone. A new pressure began forming at the edges of her carefully built world, preparing to challenge the stability she had earned. When a man who once held authority returns after a long absence, the household does not immediately remember him as he was. It remembers the version constructed in his absence, softened or sharpened by time. His reappearance unsettles the balance she has created, not because he intends harm, but because his presence reactivates expectations that no longer fit the estate she now governs. She greets him with composure, offering no sign of uncertainty, though she feels the weight of every eye waiting to see what parts of her authority she will relinquish. The early days of his return unfold cautiously. He observes changes he did not authorize: the restructured fields, the disciplined staff, and the clarified contracts, and she lets him look without interruption. She neither apologizes nor defends her decisions. She simply answers his questions with calm, factual precision. Her tone makes clear that these systems are not temporary adjustments but established structures. By speaking only when necessary, she denies him the chance to interpret her actions as impulsive or emotional. He finds no unraveling to exploit. Setting boundaries becomes essential. She does not declare them openly, for confrontation would only encourage those waiting to see weakness. Instead, she creates boundaries through practice. She continues overseeing accounts, meeting with tenants, and walking the estate grounds at dawn. Her routines remain unchanged, signaling that her authority has not paused. When he attempts to retake certain responsibilities, she presents updated records for him to review. Records so thorough and precise that refusal would make him appear negligent. The estate itself becomes evidence of her competence. The staff reacts carefully to his presence, splitting their attention between old loyalties and the new order she has forged. Some expect her to step aside quickly, others fear the return of instability. She addresses none of these concerns directly. Instead, she continues rewarding reliability, acknowledging quiet diligence, and correcting missteps with the same measured tone she used before his arrival. In doing so, she reassures the household that leadership has not shifted. Even if circumstances have, he soon realizes that the estate no longer requires the kind of control he once exercised. His former authority had relied on familiarity and habit. Hers is built on structure and consistency. The contrast becomes clear each time he asks about decisions made in his absence. She answers without hesitation, explaining why certain fields were rested, why new contracts replaced old ones, and why financial records now follow strict formats. He cannot accuse her of overstepping, because every choice aligns with the estate's survival. The logic of her actions leaves little room for dispute. Still, he may attempt to assert his role through small gestures, calling unexpected meetings, offering instructions to staff, or proposing changes without understanding their consequences. She counters these attempts, not through argument, but through clarity. She asks measured questions, requests details, and insists on reviewing implications before anything proceeds. Her precision slows his momentum, forcing him to acknowledge the complexity of the systems she built. In these exchanges, authority shifts not through dominance, but through competence. Retaining her influence requires safeguarding the network she developed during his absence. She continues meeting discreetly with merchants, stewards, and trusted relatives, reinforcing paths of communication that do not depend on him. These relationships have grown used to her leadership. They adapt awkwardly to his return. She uses this discomfort carefully, offering reassurance through steady decision-making. People who once relied on her judgment do not easily transfer their trust. Their hesitation strengthens her position. She avoids presenting herself as a rival. Instead, she frames every action around the estate's stability, allowing others to draw their own conclusions about who sustains it. Publicly, she shows respect for his presence. Privately, she ensures no critical information or responsibility shifts solely into his hands. This balance allows her to maintain control without provoking conflict. Over time, observers recognize that while he has returned, the estate continues to move according to her quiet rhythm. He may eventually sense the unspoken truth. The household no longer functions under his direction alone. If he pushes too forcefully, he risks disrupting the stability she has cultivated. If he withdraws entirely, He concedes that she holds the estate together more effectively than he ever did. His choice is narrow, shaped by the practical reality that the structure she built cannot function without her. She does not celebrate this position. She does not display satisfaction or triumph. Her expression remains calm. Her actions methodical. Power, to her, is not a prize but a responsibility, one she accepted out of necessity and now protects out of duty. His return becomes not a threat, but a test of whether the estate's new order can withstand old expectations. In the end, her authority survives, not because she denies his, but because she demonstrates through every quiet decision that leadership rests in the hands of the one who sustains order, not the one who merely reappears. Her measured response to his return revealed how stability, once established, could not easily be displaced by old hierarchies. The estate continued to move with her discipline, leaving little space for past authority to reclaim its former ground. Ahead of her, negotiations grew more intricate, demanding subtle alliances and careful bargaining beyond the household walls. Negotiation, in her world, did not unfold across tables or through bold declarations. It happened in quiet rooms, during brief pauses in conversation, through gestures that carried meaning precisely because they avoided attention. As the estate regained stability, new decisions emerged: marriage arrangements for her children, economic ties with extended family, and the subtle balancing of interests among those who sought influence. Each choice required delicacy. She approached these decisions not as opportunities for advancement, but as safeguards, ensuring that the order she had built remained intact. Arranging marriages for her children demanded more than evaluating wealth or reputation. She understood that a poorly chosen alliance could undo years of careful reconstruction. She studied each potential match with attention to family temperament, financial habits, and the quiet reputations that seldom appeared in formal records. Publicly, she expressed no urgency. Privately, she examined every detail. She rejected proposals that relied on superficial charm or promises of rapid advantage. Instead, she sought matches that offered stability, households with measured routines, consistent income, and a reluctance to engage in unnecessary conflict. Her children would not be used to repair the fractures caused by past scandal. They would inherit the steadiness she fought to create. Economic alliances through relatives required equal subtlety. Her husband's absence had revealed the fragility of past arrangements, which depended too heavily on personal goodwill rather than structured agreements. She approached relatives cautiously, initiating small collaborations before committing to larger ventures. A shared investment in livestock here, a coordinated sale of grain there. These were test cases, designed to reveal how responsibly others behaved when money, pride, and expectation intertwined. Those who conducted themselves with clarity earned her trust. Those who acted impulsively or tried to leverage her position found their involvement quietly limited. She used documentation as both shield and signal. Every agreement she entered into, even with close kin, was written clearly and witnessed properly. This formality discouraged casual exploitation. Relatives soon realized that negotiations with her required precision, not persuasion. She offered fairness, but only within boundaries she set. This approach prevented financial entanglements from becoming emotional traps, something too common among families recovering from scandal. Balancing the competing interests of different factions demanded a deeper level of awareness. Some families preferred conservative decisions, others pushed for expansion. A few quietly hoped for alliances that would increase their influence at her expense. She never declared allegiance to any single group. Instead, she positioned herself as the stabilizing force, unmoved by pressure, responsive only to what the estate required. People eventually understood that she could not be swayed by hints, flattery, or veiled threats. This neutrality became its own power, allowing her to maneuver without revealing her direction. She often encountered situations where two factions sought her support for conflicting aims. Rather than choosing sides openly, she asked questions that exposed the flaws or impracticalities in each plan. Her inquiries made proponents reconsider their assumptions, weakening proposals before they grew too forceful. In this way, she avoided escalating tensions without ever appearing dismissive. Those who sought to manipulate the estate's resources learned that she would not be rushed. Her restraint gave her an advantage in negotiations. She did not fill silences with explanations. She allowed them to expand until the other person revealed more than they intended. She listened for hesitations, inconsistencies, and attempts to disguise ambition as necessity. By observing rather than reacting, she positioned herself as the immovable center around which others adjusted their strategies. Her steadiness discouraged reckless proposals, making clear that only well-considered plans would survive her scrutiny. She rarely asserted control outright. Instead, she shaped outcomes by guiding discussions toward practical considerations. Land boundaries, inheritance conditions, seasonal risks, and long-term obligations. Her focus on sustainability disarmed those who approached negotiation with opportunism. Gradually, people seeking alliances learned to offer proposals that aligned with her disciplined approach. Those unwilling to adapt were quietly excluded from future arrangements. Through these interactions, she built a network not of loyalty but of mutual reliance. Each party understood that cooperation with her offered predictability, while opposition introduced uncertainty. She had no desire to dominate. Her goal was equilibrium. The estate's stability required that no single faction grow too powerful, and she reinforced this balance by distributing opportunities carefully among households she trusted. Her negotiation style reflected the life she had constructed: quiet, deliberate, and resistant to disorder. She did not seek victory. She sought continuity. Every marriage match, every financial partnership, every diplomatic gesture served the same purpose: to maintain the calm she had secured through years of disciplined labor. Her careful bargaining revealed how influence could expand without noise, shaping alliances through patience and clarity. Each agreement strengthened the estate's foundation while preserving her place at its center. A quiet shift began forming beyond these negotiations, urging her to confront matters rooted not in strategy but in emotion. Emotions, though invisible, left marks that threatened to undo the discipline she had built. They surfaced not in outbursts, but in small, private moments. When she paused too long over a familiar room, when the memory of a quarrel interrupted her concentration, when the weight of decisions pressed against her composure, she understood that personal pain, if allowed to drift into her judgment, could weaken everything she had constructed. So she learned to handle her emotions the way she handled the estate: quietly, methodically, and without seeking sympathy. Her first step was to separate feeling from consequence. When old resentment stirred, toward her absent husband, toward those who whispered during the scandal, toward the years spent in uncertainty, she acknowledged the emotion only long enough to prevent it from influencing her choices. She refused to let bitterness shape her interactions or her policies. Decisions about land, finances, or social alliances depended on clarity, not memory. She trained herself to pause before responding, to breathe until her thoughts aligned with practicality. This deliberate restraint became her armor. The discipline required to maintain this separation was not effortless. Some days, she felt the strain of silence, especially when dealing with individuals who once contributed to her hardship. Their presence could trigger a flash of anger or disappointment, but she allowed none of it to surface. These emotions, though justified, offered no advantage. She carried them privately, refusing to let them define her relationships or her leadership. Such control did not erase her feelings. It simply ensured they did not dictate her path. She also learned to navigate affection with caution. Moments of warmth toward her children, pride in their progress, or comfort in their company remained real but measured. She avoided placing emotional expectations on them, recognizing how easily affection could turn into vulnerability in a world that valued stability over sentiment. Her role required consistency, not indulgence. She expressed care through routine, steady instruction, reliable presence, and thoughtful provision, rather than through displays that risked exposing her internal state. Her interactions with the returned husband, if he remained in the household, demanded the most caution. His presence could awaken remnants of companionship or disappointment. Yet she refused to let either influence her decisions. She neither punished him for past failures nor relied on him for validation. She treated him as a figure connected to the estate, but not essential to its function. This emotional distance allowed her to retain control while avoiding conflict. Resentment might flicker beneath the surface, but she contained it with the same precision she used to manage accounts or negotiate contracts. Constructing a calm exterior became essential. People expected steadiness from her. Any sign of wavering would revive their curiosity about the past. She maintained the same composed expression in public, the same deliberate gestures, the same moderated tone, even in private moments. She practiced stillness, knowing that habit could overcome impulse. This outward calm became her identity, one that reassured allies and discouraged adversaries. The more consistently she displayed it, the less others questioned her decisions. Yet this calm did not mean emptiness. She allowed herself brief moments of private release, a silent walk along the boundary of the property, a pause by the hearth after the household slept, a quiet breath before entering a crowded room. These small retreats provided enough space to absorb emotion without being overtaken by it. She did not seek catharsis. She sought equilibrium. Such moments gave her the strength to resume the discipline her position required. Her emotional restraint also shaped how others perceived her. People who once viewed her as fragile gradually came to see her as immovable. They mistook her quietness for serenity, unaware of the effort behind it. This misinterpretation served her well. A leader whose emotions remain unreadable is difficult to manipulate. Her calm presence unsettled those who hoped to provoke her into missteps, and it reassured those who depended on her judgment. Through this careful balance, acknowledging emotions without yielding to them, expressing care without exposing weakness, she built a form of strength not easily disrupted. Her internal landscape remained private, shielded behind the same discipline she used to manage the estate. Decisions emerged from clear analysis rather than impulse, giving her authority a depth that no outward display of confidence could match. Her controlled silence revealed how power deepened when emotion no longer shaped her course, allowing her to navigate each challenge with measured certainty. The stability she maintained within herself reinforced the stability of the estate, guiding her toward a broader understanding of authority beyond personal turmoil. As her influence solidified, society began reassessing the place women like her occupied in its structure. Quiet authority did not emerge all at once. It gathered slowly. In the routines she repeated, in the decisions she made without spectacle, and in the way people adjusted themselves around her. She never claimed dominance or demanded recognition. Instead, she allowed others to draw their own conclusions from the steadiness of her presence. In time, they understood that the estate moved according to her rhythm, not because she forced compliance, but because her reliability left no room for alternatives. She never announced success. That was not her way. When harvests improved, when finances stabilized, when conflicts resolved themselves through her measured interventions, she did not invite praise. Accomplishments settled quietly into daily life, becoming part of the estate's natural order. The absence of self-promotion created a different kind of influence, one rooted in certainty rather than noise. Those who observed her work came to expect competence, not because she declared it, but because she demonstrated it consistently. Her refusal to humiliate others strengthened this perception, even when faced with individuals who once doubted or undermined her. She avoided exposing their weaknesses publicly. She corrected mistakes calmly, addressed failures with precision, and refused to entertain gossip that might erode someone's dignity. This restraint discouraged rivalry. People found it difficult to challenge a leader who did not weaponize authority, who did not turn errors into lessons meant to embarrass. Her composure offered protection to those under her care, and in return, they supported her without hesitation. Avoiding open confrontation became a hallmark of her leadership. Conflicts dissolved before they could grow, because she addressed their causes discreetly. If tenants disagreed, she reviewed their claims personally, asking steady questions until resentment gave way to clarity. If relatives attempted to assert influence, she responded with documentation and poise rather than emotional reaction. Her calm forced others to match her tone, converting heated disputes into manageable discussions. Through this quiet shaping of interactions, she created an atmosphere where disorder had little room to take hold. People outside the estate noticed the shift in her demeanor as well. Merchants described her as even-tempered and direct. Clergymen noted the steadiness of her contributions. Neighbors observed that where her husband had relied on charm or impulse, she relied on a system that minimized uncertainty. Her name began circulating not with caution, but with respect. She became known for efficiency, for fairness, for a style of leadership that wasted no movement and produced no unnecessary conflict. This reputation, grounded in consistency, allowed her to maintain power without asserting it loudly. Those who interacted with her adjusted their expectations accordingly. They approached her with measured proposals, aware that emotional appeals held little sway. They recognized that she valued clarity above persuasion, preparation above performance. Over time, even outspoken individuals softened their tone when dealing with her, instinctively mirroring the quiet discipline she embodied. Children in the household learned from her example as well. They watched how she handled pressure, not with dramatic gestures but with intentional stillness. They observed how she made decisions slowly, refusing to rush even when urgency surrounded her. They saw that she earned influence not by demanding obedience, but by maintaining order. This quiet modeling shaped their understanding of authority, teaching them that power did not need to terrify in order to steer an entire household. Her influence extended into spaces where noise once dominated. Meetings with tenants grew less tense because her presence created a sense of direction. Agreements formed smoothly because she removed uncertainty long before it had a chance to grow. She became a constant in a world accustomed to fluctuation. And constancy, more than any declaration, solidified her position. She understood the weight of this quiet authority. It required constant discipline, careful restraint, and an ability to endure both scrutiny and silence. Yet it gave her something louder forms of power rarely achieve: durability. Those who gain authority through confrontation must continue fighting to keep it. Those who gain it through steadiness simply maintain what already aligns with the natural order. In the end, her leadership revealed that true power did not depend on noise, dominance, or spectacle. It depended on being the one others trusted to keep the world from falling apart. She stepped into that role not out of ambition, but out of necessity, and others accepted her because she demanded nothing, yet delivered everything the estate required. Her steady presence showed that influence deepened when noise faded, allowing authority to root itself quietly in daily life. People followed her, not because she asked, but because her consistency left no space for doubt. With such stability in place, the future of her household began taking shape in ways that would define the generations that followed. Legacy, for her, was not a grand proclamation carved into stone, or a story told with triumphant embellishment. It unfolded quietly, in the rhythms of daily life, in the lessons absorbed by those who watched her move through uncertainty with steadiness rather than spectacle. Her children inherited not merely land or wealth, but a model of leadership shaped through restraint, composure, and the refusal to let disorder dictate the future. They learned by observing her, often without realizing it, because the strongest lessons emerged in silence rather than instruction. Her son, the future heir, grew accustomed to seeing decisions made without raised voices or rushed conclusions. He watched her evaluate problems by narrowing them into manageable parts, never allowing emotion to cloud what needed to be done. When he accompanied her across the fields, she did not lecture. Instead, she pointed out the practical signs of well-tended land, the firmness of soil, the alignment of fences, and the steadiness of livestock. Through these quiet details, he came to understand leadership not as assertion, but as vigilance, responsibility. He learned meant maintaining what others overlooked. Her daughters absorbed a different set of lessons. They observed how she navigated social spaces with calm authority, how she maintained boundaries without aggression, how she preserved dignity even when those around her faltered. They learned that influence did not require noise, that a steady posture could silence a room more effectively than anger, and that careful silence was not weakness but protection. These lessons shaped their understanding of their own roles, teaching them to move through the world with the same disciplined restraint their mother embodied. The household itself became a testament to her legacy. Stability persisted, not through fear or rigid enforcement, but through the predictable structure she had built. Servants knew their duties. Tenants understood expectations. Relatives recognized that disputes would be addressed calmly, methodically, and without room for manipulation. This environment taught the next generation that order could withstand upheaval when guided by someone who refused to be overwhelmed by it. As her children matured, they began to reflect her tone in their own interactions. Her son spoke with measured patience during discussions, avoiding the impulsive reactions common among boys his age. Her daughters mirrored her careful neutrality when confronted with disagreements. Observers noticed these parallels and attributed them not to temperament, but to upbringing. People understood that the estate's calm had shaped the children just as surely as it had shaped their mother's authority. The family's stability through periods of external turmoil reinforced her influence. When shortages threatened neighboring households, her estate remained functional. When disputes erupted among local families, she and her children maintained distance, offering clarity only when necessary. This steadiness created a pattern that outsiders could not ignore, while others faltered under pressure. Her household absorbed it and continued forward without visible strain. Stability became the signature of her lineage. Over time, this continuity altered how the family was perceived. They were no longer seen as survivors of scandal, but as keepers of a disciplined order that outlasted disorder. People spoke of them with respect born from predictability. They had become a fixture in the region, providing quiet reassurance to those seeking evidence that chaos could be overcome. Her children inherited this perception just as they inherited the estate itself. The community expected them to maintain the calm she had established, and they met these expectations with a dignity shaped by years of observation. Power passed from her to the next generation without a dramatic ceremony. It flowed through the structures she built, through the habits she instilled, through the trust she earned. They stepped into leadership roles gradually, participating in decisions before fully assuming responsibility. She did not rush this process. She allowed authority to settle naturally, ensuring that her children understood not only the tasks themselves but the posture required to perform them. Leadership, she taught, was sustained through patience and steadiness, not dominance. Even as she withdrew from certain duties, her influence remained visible. The estate continued to operate according to the systems she had established, The tone she had set, quiet, disciplined, restrained, continued shaping decisions long after she stopped making them directly. Her legacy endured not because it was proclaimed, but because it had become the foundation of the household's identity. Her quiet leadership formed a pattern her children carried forward, allowing the estate to remain steady across shifting circumstances. The discipline she lived became the framework they used, ensuring continuity without disruption. Beyond this generational passage, society itself began to reconsider the place women like her held in the broader structure of power. Society did not shift its expectations overnight. Perceptions changed gradually, shaped by countless small observations. Her measured decisions, her restored estate, her disciplined presence in public spaces. People who once viewed her through the narrow lens of scandal began to reassess what a wife, and later a widow, could be. This transformation did not come from declarations or reforms. It emerged from the unmistakable evidence of her competence, displayed quietly over time, until even the most resistant observers could no longer ignore it. At first, these shifts occurred in whispers. Individuals who visited the estate left with impressions they could not reconcile with their former assumptions. They saw orderly tenants, stable accounts, improved harvests, and a household functioning with a clarity that had been absent for years. They noticed her calm demeanor, her attention to details her husband had overlooked, and the respect she commanded without raising her voice. These impressions lingered in their conversations, softening old judgments and planting the first seeds of change. Neighbors who once dismissed wives as dependents began acknowledging her efficiency. They remarked, sometimes reluctantly, that she handled negotiations with greater precision than her husband had. Merchants observed that she kept her word, that her contracts were clear, that her payments were punctual. Clergymen noted her steady contributions and her consistent presence, neither ostentatious nor withdrawn. Each observation challenged the assumption that women belonged only in the background of domestic life. Gradually, society began adjusting its expectations. People realized that her authority was not an anomaly or a temporary adaptation to her husband's absence. It was a demonstration of capability, an ability to manage land, finance, social ties, an internal order with a discipline that rivaled, and often surpassed, that of men in similar positions. By continuing her work without explanation or apology, she forced others to confront the narrowness of their previous beliefs. Conversations shifted accordingly. Individuals who once questioned whether she could maintain the estate now discussed her leadership as a matter of fact. They spoke of how she resolved disputes with clarity, how she maintained fairness in her dealings, and how she upheld the estate's reputation during uncertain times. These conversations occurred in marketplaces, churches, and family gatherings, gradually weaving a new narrative around the role of a wife. Her actions became examples referenced by others, navigating similar uncertainties. Her influence extended beyond her own household. Other women observed her quiet command and found themselves reconsidering their own positions. Some began taking a more active role in managing their lands or participating in decisions previously left to their husbands. They adopted her steadiness, the way she listened carefully, spoke cautiously, and made choices rooted in practicality. Her example demonstrated that leadership did not require confrontation. It required patience, precision, and the refusal to be diminished by expectation. Men, too, adjusted their views, though often with hesitation. Those who interacted with her directly understood quickly that dismissing her would be a mistake. They recognized her ability to interpret contracts, evaluate proposals, and anticipate risks. Some felt unsettled by her competence, but even they acknowledged its effectiveness. Others found relief in working with someone whose decisions were consistent and rational. Over time, resistance gave way to acceptance. and acceptance gave way to respect. The shift in perception did not elevate her publicly. No titles were bestowed. No formal recognition offered. Instead, her role expanded in the quiet spaces of social expectation. People began seeking her input when disputes arose, or when uncertain decisions needed a calm mind. Her presence lent stability to gatherings, not because she asserted authority, but because others trusted her ability to see clearly through complexity. This trust, once earned, became difficult to retract. Her transformation challenged long-standing assumptions about dependency. She had been expected to fade into the background after her husband's departure. Yet she emerged as the central force, holding the estate together. Society saw this and began acknowledging that wives could manage more than domestic routines. They could guide entire households, protect economic stability, and negotiate alliances, all without raising their voices or stepping outside the boundaries of propriety. The role of women expanded quietly in her shadow. People did not discuss this change openly, but they felt its presence in the way they interacted with her and women like her. Authority no longer seemed incompatible with femininity. Competence no longer surprised them. Stability no longer required a man's hand. Her existence, not her rhetoric, shifted the landscape of expectation. Her steady leadership revealed how society's perception of wives could evolve when confronted with undeniable capability, allowing new possibilities to take root in silence. As these changes settled into daily life, attention turned toward what remained unwritten, the way history would record the moment when power shifted subtly inside the home, when the men who once defined a household's direction disappeared, through war, exile, illness, or simple abandonment. The world inside the estate did not collapse. It adjusted, reorganized, and slowly reshaped itself around the one person who remained constant. She did not set out to replace them or to claim authority through declaration. Instead, the weight of responsibility shifted toward her naturally. Settling into the quiet spaces, she had kept steady through every season of uncertainty. People around her gradually recognized that the household continued to function not because of memories of past leadership, but because of her deliberate actions in the present. The absence of men created a silence that exposed everything they had left unattended. Contracts are poorly maintained. Land left fallow. Debts left unresolved. Staff left without guidance. In that silence, she stepped forward, not with triumph, but with necessity. She examined what had been ignored, repaired what had been damaged, and strengthened what had been neglected. Her actions formed a steady rhythm that others learned to follow, replacing disorder with a calm structure she never boasted about. Power did not transfer through a single moment. It shifted through countless small decisions she made without fanfare. Walking the boundary lines at dawn, reviewing accounts by candlelight, considering proposals with calm questions instead of hurried reactions. People began to rely on this steadiness. They sought her judgment not because they wished to elevate her, but because she offered clarity in a world that had briefly lost its sense of direction. With each passing season, the estate grew more reflective of her choices. Roads improved. Storage rooms stayed organized. Market negotiations concluded without conflict. The staff worked with greater certainty because expectations were clearly defined, and her responses were predictable. Tenants stopped referring to the household by the absent husband's name, and instead spoke of the estate under her guidance, an acknowledgement that emerged naturally rather than through instruction. This steady transformation also reshaped relationships with the surrounding community. Merchants valued her consistency. Clergymen respected her quiet generosity. Officials found her easier to work with than her predecessors, who had often relied on impulse rather than discipline. People who once doubted her capability now recognized that their own stability often depended on her ability to maintain hers. They adapted accordingly, adjusting their tone, their assumptions, and eventually their understanding of what a woman could represent. History often presents power as something loud, a force declared, seized, or defended through conflict. Her authority defied this narrative. It emerged in silence, through endurance rather than struggle, through reliability rather than ambition. She did not compete with the men who had once held authority. She replaced their absence with something sturdier. Her leadership became a quiet thread woven through daily life until it formed a fabric no one could imagine the estate without. Inside the household, her children absorbed these changes in subtle ways. They learned that leadership was not a role one demanded, but a responsibility one carried. They saw how influence grew from consistency rather than spectacle, from the ability to remain calm when others faltered. Her example shaped their understanding of resilience, not as heroic defiance, but as the slow, a disciplined act of continuing forward. When choices are limited and burdens are heavy, even the returning men, when they appeared, found themselves stepping into a world no longer formed around their habits. They sensed the shift, not through confrontation, but through the simple realization that the estate no longer required them. They encountered structures they had never built, systems they had never refined, and routines that continued without their input. Some accepted this with quiet resignation, others resisted it, only to find that their objections held little influence. The estate's identity had changed, resting now on the foundation she had constructed piece by piece. As time passed, people began to retell her story with a softened, reverent tone. They spoke not of scandal or struggle, but of how she held the estate together when it might have fallen apart. They described her calm presence, her disciplined decisions, her refusal to let uncertainty dictate the household's fate. These retellings transformed her into a figure of stability, not because she sought admiration, but because her actions offered reassurance in a world frequently shaken by loss. She herself never embraced the idea of being central to the estate's narrative. Her focus remained on practical needs, maintaining fields, preparing for winter, and ensuring her children's future. Yet even she could sense the shift in how others regarded her. Their questions grew more respectful, their reliance more open, their assumptions about women's capabilities more flexible. Without speaking of it, she had expanded the boundaries of what society expected. Not through rebellion, but through practice. Her life became evidence that history does not wait for grand declarations or dramatic returns. It moves quietly through households, adjusts to new hands, and records the actions of those who step forward when others cannot. She had not set out to change the story of her family or her society. She had simply taken responsibility when responsibility fell upon her. But in doing so, she rewrote the path of the estate, the expectations of her children, and the memory of everyone who witnessed her steady ascent. In the end, she understood that power did not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived disguised as obligation, settled into daily routines, and revealed itself only when others realized the world continued to move because she kept it moving. Her story, shaped in silence, demonstrated how authority could grow without confrontation and endure without proclamation. Her quiet rise showed that when familiar structures collapse, someone inevitably steps into the space they leave behind. Guided not by ambition, but by necessity, her presence filled the void with steadiness, reshaping the household's future without demanding recognition. And in this quiet transformation, a new history began, written from within the walls of the home, carried by the one who never expected to lead, but did so with unwavering calm. May your night be soft, your thoughts unburdened, and your rest deep enough to quiet the echoes of the day. May the calm she carried become a calm you feel, steady and unbroken. Sleep peacefully, and let the quiet strength of her story stay with you as the world settles.